Thank you so much, Christy. Great to see you all here. Lovely to be with you again. And especially fantastic, of course, once again to be joined with a guest speaker reminding us that we are and will remain part of a wider European green family. So thank you so much for being here. Colleagues, once upon a time, not so very long ago, there was a little boy growing up in Western Bartonshire, and he found himself sometimes taken along to local Green Party branch meetings held in somebody's front room, or sometimes sent out on the back of a borrowed van hurling around bundles of newspapers in the early days of a community recycling project, or sometimes wondering how long it would be before Mum would get arrested for lying down in front of the nuclear convoys. It wasn't long in the end. They were simpler times, weren't they? They were simpler times for Scotland. We were under the thumb, poll tax and all, and everybody just knew it. They were simpler times in politics. Everybody knew that politicians didn't always tell the truth, but at least they all accepted that such a thing as truth existed. And occasionally, getting caught out not telling it would even end a career. It's hard to believe now, I know. In a way, they were simpler times for Greens as well. Greens already knew in those days that human beings, by burning through finite resources, were setting ourselves up for an ecological crisis. Everybody else in politics simply denied it or simply ignored it. Very, very simple. But Greens also knew that we had to try and make people believe that better choices were possible, and that by taking the radical action that climate change requires, we'd also be able to hand on a better world. To believe that optimism might just possibly be justified. Now, as that wee boy stands here today, only a little bit taller, but quite a lot bolder, as we all look around at the world about us, as we look at the chaos of Brexit, the challenges to democracy here in Scotland and around the world, and as we hear the latest, direst, starkest warnings yet from the scientific community, it all makes being an optimist pretty hard work. But friends, even or especially when optimism is hard work, we as Greens have to hold on to it. As a Green Party and as a Green movement, we still have to inspire people with the belief that better choices are possible, that radical action can be taken, and that we can find hope in such challenging times. And that's what Greens are doing. As Grace has set out, last week has seen historic Green results from across Europe, from Belgium to Bavaria to Luxembourg, building on the successes of others in the Netherlands and Finland. Such a contrast with the performance of the far right. They are dangerous, to be sure, but they've been far less successful than the continual, relentless media hype would have led people to expect. So congratulations to our fellow European Greens who defied the pundits and created that green wave. Greens are not just the only party and movement joining the dots on climate change, being honest about what needs to change, but also showing how the transition can be a benefit to people. Not just a few extra green jobs here or there, but a green economy and a culture of equality, human rights, non-violence, and democracy. That same green movement is giving people a real alternative to the failed middle ground of politics, an infinitely more positive and constructive alternative than the far right and populist parties or their UK equivalent, the self-destructive convulsion of Brexit. Even if, back in 2016, some people persuaded themselves that there was a left progressive case for leaving the EU. Or even if They were willing to bet that if the Leave campaign won, cool heads would prevail and a calm, orderly plan would emerge. Or even if they only trusted that this was a proper democratic process where if both sides would play by the rules and the result would be a fair and settled decision. Even if some people managed to take those views, surely now there is no denying that this whole process is one of sheer incompetent chaos. And that's why we're standing up against Brexit at every opportunity. The direct harm of Brexit will be inflicted on us here in Scotland with a direct assault on the authority of our Parliament. The harm will be inflicted throughout the UK as well, and on the island of Ireland, and in other EU countries whose links with us here are not just about business and trade, but they're about science, culture, friendship and family, and those impacts will be profoundly harmful. And the harm will be compounded if we allow the hard-right ideologues who are behind this whole project to embark on yet another round of disaster capitalism. The extreme Brexiteers are already flirting with the sociopaths of the US libertarian right, the same outfits which have been a force for ill from climate denial to union busting. That's the agenda these people want to impose on us, one in which the social, environmental and workplace rights and protections which were fought for by generations before us are torn to pieces in the pursuit of an already failed economic system. And both the Tories and Labour want to end freedom of movement. I am sick to death of hearing the issue of migration debated only in terms of the economic benefit to us. How much do they pay in? How many benefits do they claim? Migration is a more human story than that. And human lives are about far more than their economic worth. The freedom to decide where to live, where to work, where to learn, or where to make a life is something that enriches us all. I would love to live in a world, I want to live in a world in which nobody feels that they're forced to move, that they have no choice but to escape persecution, threats to their life, economic desperation, or environmental collapse. But in the meantime, I refuse to live. I am not willing to live in a world in which the countries which cause those very problems around the world are the ones throwing up walls and fences and borders to control and demean the lives of others. So the Greens will never use the language of the insipid centre ground of politics, portraying freedom of movement as only economic self-interest. We will stand for freedom of movement as a force for good in its own right and in defence of migrants against a deliberately hostile environment designed to humiliate and traumatise them. But what does Theresa May's government ask us to look forward to in all this? A festival of Brexit Britain. Could any day out sound less appealing? The only reason to call a festival will be if we cancel Brexit and stop this mess. Brexit Britain doesn't sound like the kind of place I want to live. And as a party, we remain committed to a positive vision of Scotland's future as an independent country and a full member of the European family. But the events of the next few weeks and months will pose a critical threat to the very future of our democracy, with the traditional principle of the sovereignty of the Scottish people being torn to shreds by a UK government determined to lash us to the decks of HMS Brexit Britain. Conference, this weekend you will debate our position on the call for a people's vote that is already being championed by Caroline Lucas and the Green Party of England and Wales. And like Maggie, I can't stay neutral on that question either. Even if it is a narrow window of opportunity to bring that vote about, and even if bringing it about gives us no guarantee of the outcome, we've already said as a party that it looks like now being the only way, the only possibility of stopping Brexit. And the motion you'll debate at conference this weekend gives you the choice to give a clearer, unequivocal stance, joining the chorus of voices saying loudly that the only thing to do is to stop this mess, and if Westminster won't come to its senses, let the public be the ones to cancel Brexit. But whether or not that can be achieved, we do need to look deeper at the causes of Brexit, the issues that lay behind that campaign, and the reasons why so many people were willing to ignore the obvious lies of the Leave campaign and were won over by the slogan, "Take back control." It was a powerful slogan. It was powerful because the desire for some control over your life and your community is natural, and yet so many people feel so powerless, so alienated from those in power. Having some control shouldn't mean pointing the finger at scapegoats, whether the European Union or immigration. It should mean, and could mean, taking back power which has been handed to the markets and to the private sector, power in our lives which should be democratically accountable, but which is currently exercised for the self-interest of corporations and shareholders. Friends, optimism these days can indeed feel like hard work, but defeatism would be disaster. Our movement will be rooted, must always be rooted, in the positive belief that we can still take action to make the world a better place, to transform our economy in response both to inequality and the climate emergency, and to give communities the power they need and deserve. And that's what we're doing, leading the change more successfully now than ever. Our councillors are doing this around the country, from the inspirational work that Kim Long has done in Glasgow, successfully standing up for people threatened with deportation and against the mass evictions planned by the Home Office's outsourced bullies, Serco. To Alex Staniforth in Edinburgh, pioneering the case for letting councils use a tourist tax to raise vital funds to protect their local services. And Christie and her colleagues in Glasgow challenging the SNP Council leadership on their support for the Glasgow Arms Fair this summer and forcing them to adopt an ethical events policy. And it's an issue Steve Sankey has been working on as well in Orkney, working across party lines to achieve a commitment from Orkney Islands Council to responsible investment principles, which will help to divert funds away from the arms trade and into the positive future our economy needs. In Holyrood, we've consistently put forward positive ideas, leading the change and making a difference for people across Scotland. On the environment, the SNP have shown themselves to be pretty strong on words, but often weak on action. The illegal persecution of birds of prey, the mass killing of mountain hares, these have become routine across the country, and fox hunting too continues to take place. The SNP say they condemn these practices, but they seem unwilling to act, cowed by opposition from the hunting lobby and landowners. It's the Greens who are keeping the pressure on, speaking up for the natural world when no one else will. John Finney and Mark Ruskell have highlighted the devastating impact that the plan to dredge Scotland's kelp forests could have on wildlife, on local communities and the climate. And they've won legislation that would ban this practice, albeit so far without SNP support. We've consistently been on the right side of history when it comes to equality. Both equal marriage and equal civil partnership were Scottish Green Party policy nearly 2 decades ago. And we've long recognised trans members of our party and our society respecting their identities on their terms. They are currently enduring an appalling climate of hostility in the media and in everyday life, and I want them to know that this party stands with them. And as a party, we will always strive for more progress on equality and diversity, inside the party and in our political impact. Last year saw us elect many more young councillors and women councillors, and we'll always be open to constructive ideas about how to do better. Just in the last year, Green influence in Parliament has held the government to account on education as well, not just opposing the government's bad ideas, but encouraging them to copy our good ones. And our MSPs have championed safer streets, protection of children, a planning system that works for people, and in particular, Alison Johnson's huge successes in achieving changes to the social security system. Alison has ensured that Scotland's social security system will not impose unnecessary and stressful disability assessments, and she's won protection against benefit sanctions that will help tens of thousands of people. Such a contrast with the UK's utterly vindictive approach to welfare reform. And we'll go further, making the case for new policies like an uplift in child benefit and ultimately a system based on universal basic income. The shift to fairer income tax was perhaps our biggest impact in the last year. Only just in the last election, the Greens proposed a radical restructuring, more rates and bans to cut inequality and fund our public services, and we were the only political party to do so. Well, we've now shifted the whole debate in Scotland on income tax, with both the SNP and Labour forced to back our ideas. Only the Tories now defend the UK approach of tax cuts for those in least need and benefit cuts for those in most need. But let's be clear, that change in Scotland to income tax, a fairer income tax system, it would not have happened without the Greens leading the change, without our determination to push the SNP beyond their comfort zone. But it wasn't the only achievement in that budget process, from investment in community-led rail initiatives to accelerated funds for marine protected areas, from an inflation-based pay increase for far more public sector workers to a commitment to shift Scotland's capital budget toward low-carbon infrastructure. And we'll be keeping the SNP under pressure to make good on those commitments. But our 2016 plan for fairer taxes to cut inequality and protect our services wasn't all about income tax. It was also about empowering local government to get rid of the broken, unfair council tax and to broaden their tax base, to give them the ability to make decisions that are right for their own areas, just like local government can do in so many other European countries, large and small. So, Conference, today we'll be asking you if you'll back the proposal that meaningful progress on local tax reform should be a precondition for budget talks this year. Without that progress, services that are vital to people's well-being will be lost. Right now, over this weekend across Glasgow, thousands of underpaid women workers are preparing to take strike action for 2 days next week in pursuit of equal pay. They've waited well over a decade for a fair settlement. They're at the end of their tether, and they don't deserve to hear the leader of Glasgow City Council blaming the unions, of all people, for the injustice. They'll have our support next week, but unless councils are given the power and resources they need to protect services, many more public sector workers may be forced to take such extreme measures. Greens don't want our local communities across Scotland to be constantly fighting a rearguard action against cuts, but instead to be able to use the power of the local state to invest in a better future. That's where many of the radical changes that are necessary in response to climate change must happen, from bike lanes to the built environment, from green spaces to clean energy. Our local councils have a vital role to play, but they cannot act with their hands tied. And on that climate agenda, Greens know that our response must go way beyond a technical argument about targets. It's absolutely vital that we get the targets right for full net zero ambition, and we'll have much more to say on that as the bill progresses through Parliament. But the climate emergency must inform every aspect of how we run our economy. In the IPCC report, and also in the wave of renewed public concern, there is a clear recognition that what's needed is not a mere technical fix, but a wholesale, systemic change in our economy, exactly as the Greens have been advocating for so many years. Lots of people are doing what they can as individuals, but that's never going to be enough on its own, and it's not where the true responsibility lies, when those 100 giant corporations are responsible for nearly 3/4 of global emissions, and when industries like aviation and fossil fuel are still handed tax breaks by governments here in Scotland and around the world. There are big differences between Scotland and the UK on this agenda, to be sure. There's good progress here on renewables, while the UK government has essentially halted onshore wind and given the go-ahead to fracking. But sadly, despite these differences, there are too many similarities as well. The UK and Scottish governments have agreed, without asking Parliament, that the urgent examination of the need for increased ambition in light of the IPCC report will be restricted from looking at the targets for the next 12 years, exactly the period that the IPCC say is so critical. And both governments put GDP growth above all else. Both share an unthinking support for maximum oil and gas extraction. So it falls to us, the Greens, to lead the change and make the case for fossil fuel divestment. As we do in relation to the arms trade, the war profiteers, we must build the case for divestment from fossil fuels too. We know there's no future in an economy still dependent on fossil fuel. We know there are better investments out there which have a chance of building a strong economy that can last for the long term. But we should also be unafraid to say that we are sick of seeing the wealth of our economy, wealth that we all generate, lining the pockets of the carbon profiteers whose self-interest is leading the world to the brink of destruction. So we'll demand of our local councils, of the Scottish Government and of all its agencies, divest now. Friends, green ideas have the potential to bring the transformational change that we need, from a social security system that's worthy of the name to a recognition that freedom of movement is a human right, not just an economic necessity. From ending the delusion of everlasting growth to the urgency of rebuilding a local state that's capable of investing for the future and ensuring that the transition to a post-oil economy is a just transition that leaves no one behind. But we need to do more than just debate these ideas. We need to make them a reality. We can replicate the fantastic successes of Greens across Europe. We have the positivity, we have the policies, we have the vision. And there's a real need, there's an appetite for that positive vision of a future that we believe in. But it won't happen by magic. We need to put in the energy in our local campaigns and creativity in the way that we communicate those ideas. That means getting out there, back into campaign mode. Let's remember that in relation to the Scottish Parliament, we're no longer post-election anymore. We're now pre-election once again, as we look forward to electing more MSPs and more councillors the year after that. But more than that, recognising that we need to be there, however far away the next election is, active in communities, having conversations on the doorsteps, standing with those who are working for change, and supporting the marginalised, the people who've been marginalised by the world that we are seeking to transform. Here in Glasgow, we're already getting geared up for 2021 and beyond. We're working not just for one extra regional MSP, but more, for our first ever constituency seat too, and maybe for the chance to knock a Tory or two off the list as well. And not just focusing on the parliamentary elections, but laying the groundwork for our best ever council election the year after, where more communities than before will benefit from the passion, the commitment and the inspiration of our Green councillor leading the change at local level. This can and must happen in every part of Scotland. You have the power to lead this change in your community, in your branches, in your campaigning, changing the world one doorstep at a time, learning as we go what our supporters expect of us, inspiring them to join us and work with us for the green vision of a just, peaceful, democratic and sustainable world. That's what we are here for. It's why we exist, and we need to get out there, share our vision and make it a reality for Scotland. Thank you very much.